I woke up on my son's wedding day completely bald. The sheer shock hit me like a ton of bricks. Yet, ironically, it was the start of an unexpected liberation. A moment of reckoning that would force me to question and totally redefine my whole life. My daughter-in-law, Chelsea, had left a little card. A note steeped in pure spite, cold and cruel beyond belief. Now you look the way you should, you crazy old bird. Fate, with its twisted sense of humor, had picked this exact day. The very day I was planning to wire $12 million to her and to Scott, my only son. In a few hours I was supposed to raise a champagne glass at the reception and gush about how thrilled I was to have her in the family, dreaming of a peaceful future I foolishly believed was guaranteed. But life always finds a way to spill the tea. Let me rewind so you can grasp just how far the shadows of betrayal can stretch, and how a woman pushed to the brink can find the guts to rise again. It was my son Scott's wedding day. It should have been the most joyful day of a mother's life. But that morning started with a feeling of dread, cold and heavy, like a vice gripping my heart. My hand went up instinctively smooth. I bolted to the bathroom. The reflection staring back froze me. My silver hair, cared for over 65 years, was gone. Totally zapped. Someone had shaved my head while I slept with terrifying precision and malice. Tears poured down my face, not just for my looks, but for the sheer humiliation. For the realization that someone so close could be this vicious. Today was Scott's wedding to Chelsea, a woman who from the jump, treated me like a hindrance, a roadblock in the perfect life she'd mapped out with my son. I knew she wasn't a fan, but I'd hoped time and family ties might chill her out. On my nightstand lay a small folded note that hadn't been there the night before. My hand shook as I opened it. Now you finally look your age, pathetic old lady. Have a lovely time at my wedding. LOL. I sank onto the bed, feeling hollow like my soul had been vacuumed out. It wasn't just my hair I'd lost that morning. It was the last bit of dignity I had left in the house that used to feel like home. I recalled the way Chelsea used to snark. Grace, don't you think that color makes you look older? Maybe you should try a more modern haircut, something less ancient. And Scott, my son, would just sit there, silent or nodding, as if her insults were harmless banter. I raised Scott alone after my husband, James, passed when our boy was 12. I worked my tail off, sacrificing every personal dream to build a real estate empire. The very one Scott now coasted on. I stood before my closet, my mind racing. I could fake an illness, bail on the wedding, drown in shame. But that's exactly what Chelsea wanted. No, I wouldn't disappear. I wouldn't let her win. While looking for an outfit, my thoughts drifted back 3 years to the day Scott first introduced her. It was in Chicago at a swanky downtown spot. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, crystal stemware. Chelsea showed up 30 minutes late, not even on my bad. All evening, she blabbed only about herself, her gig, her trips, her high-roller lifestyle. She didn't ask me one single question, even though I was the mother of the guy she planned to marry. When she left the table, I looked at Scott and said, "Son, she's sketchy. She's cold and calculating." He gave me a look I'd never seen before. Distant. Icy. "Mom, Chelsea is the woman I've chosen. If you can't get on board, maybe we need some space." Space. And that's exactly what followed. Fewer calls, awkward dinners filled with dead air. And now on his wedding day, the cruelest blow of all. On my desk sat the bank documents. I had planned to wire the $12 million to Scott and Chelsea after the ceremony. A final gift, a guarantee they'd never have to worry about the dough. I thought that gesture might bring my son's affection back. Now looking in the mirror, I saw a bald woman, but behind her eyes a fire was burning. I grabbed my phone and called Tasha, my longtime stylist. "I need you to hightail it over here. Bring the best wig you've got, and please don't breathe a word to anyone." If Chelsea thought this would wreck me, she was wrong. While waiting for Tasha, I sat in the living room and memories flooded back. James's death, the endless nights grinding until 2 or 3 a.m., the days I skipped meals so Scott would eat. When James died, I was 32 and Scott was 12. I remember thinking, how am I gonna make it? How will I raise him? But in the midst of grief, I made a vow. Scott would never know fear, hunger, or insecurity. I started from nothing. Worked from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. Learned everything about real estate, investment, and finance. Every flop taught me something. Every sleepless night laid another brick in the empire I built. Scott grew up in the lap of luxury, never asking how I pulled it off. Mom, I need cash for the apartment deposit. Mom, Chelsea and I want to travel Europe. Never requests, always demands. And I, blinded by motherly love, always said yes. I did everything to make him happy. But in doing so, I forgot to teach him the value of hard work and gratitude. And today I'm paying the price. A price measured in humiliation, loneliness, and betrayal. Chelsea's arrival only made things worse, pouring gasoline on an already smoldering fire. From the first day she stepped into my place, she acted like she owned it, and I was the unwanted guest. Grace, don't you think Scott and I need a little more privacy? She asked one evening over dinner, her voice sweet as pie, her eyes cold as ice. Maybe you should move somewhere smaller, something more fitting for your age. A quiet condo where you can just chill and let us have our own lives. Scott said nothing. He just sliced his steak, pretending not to hear the suggestion that I should move out of the house I'd built, brick by brick, with blood, sweat, and tears. But what hurt most wasn't her direct words. It was the way she slowly erased me from their lives. Family dinners where they only talked to each other, as if I weren't even there. Conversations that stopped dead when I walked in. Those knowing glances when I spoke, as if I were some confused old woman out of touch with the real world. 6 months ago at Christmas dinner, Chelsea looked me in the eye and said, Grace, Scott and I have talked. We think it's time for you to step back from family decisions. You've done enough. Scott nodded, his eyes glued to his plate. That nod cut through me like a shiv. That night I lay awake until 4 a.m., crying silently so they wouldn't hear the sound of my sobs. It wasn't just the feeling of being sidelined. It was the bitter realization that the son I had raised had become a stranger, incapable of gratitude, blind to the love I had given him his whole life. And yet, just a month ago when Scott told me he was marrying Chelsea, I chose to forgive him one more time. I called my attorney Richard Miller, an old pal who'd been with our family for decades, and asked him to prep the transfer of $12 million, nearly all of my savings, as a final wedding gift to Scott and Chelsea. Are you sure, Mrs. Grace? Richard asked, his tone heavy with concern. That's the money you've worked for your entire life. You deserve to enjoy your golden years. I smiled faintly and said, I'm sure. Maybe this will finally make Scott realize his mother only wants the best for him. I was wrong. Painfully wrong. The doorbell snapped me out of my thoughts. It was Tasha carrying a large box. Her face was etched with worry. Oh my gosh, Grace, what in the heck happened to you? She gasped when she saw my bare head. I forced a crooked smile, one that felt like a broken mask. Just a little hoopsie. I need your help to make sure I look presentable for my son's wedding. She carefully fitted a gorgeous silver gray wig on my head, so realistic it was virtually identical to my own hair. When I looked in the mirror, I saw more than restored dignity. I saw a decision being forged, sharp and unshakable. I would go to that wedding. I would smile. I would raise my glass and offer my blessing. But something inside me had fundamentally changed. A flame had been lit, and nothing could put it out now. The showdown at St. John's Cathedral in Boston was breathtakingly decorated. White roses, golden candles, soft music. A perfect fairy tale scene, all built with my dime. I arrived an hour early, impeccably dressed, my face serene, my posture composed. But inside, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by a stone. I sat quietly in the back pew, observing. Then I heard Scott's voice from a nearby hallway, low but clear. No, you can't come right now, he said into his phone. The ceremony starts in an hour. We'll talk after the honeymoon, I swear. His voice was shaking a little, nervous. A terrible feeling crept through me as I moved closer, hiding behind a column. When Mom finishes the transfer, everything will be different. We can finally be together openly. No more secrets. I froze. Who was he talking to? The name that came through the receiver made my blood run cold. Vanessa. I knew her, Scott's young secretary, only 25. And in that moment everything clicked. Vanessa, don't worry, Scott continued. Mom's about to wire $12 million. After that, I'll dump Chelsea, and we'll have our freedom and more money than we could ever need. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my skin, my heart jackhammering. Chelsea has no clue, Scott said smugly. She's too obsessed with her perfect wedding. And Mom, she's so desperate to make me happy. She'll do anything I ask. Every word was a knife to my chest. My own son, the boy I raised with blood, sweat, and tears, saw me as nothing more than an ATM. Don't you feel guilty? Vanessa must have asked. Nah, Scott replied flatly. Chelsea knows the deal. We're both in it for the cash. It's a convenient marriage for both of us. My mother's had a long enough life anyway. It's time for her to retire. Retire. That word sent a chill down my spine. They wanted to stick me in a nursing home, take everything I owned, and forget I ever existed. I heard footsteps and quickly stepped back, pretending to check out the flowers by the altar. Scott appeared moments later, grinning like a happy groom. Mom, he said, kissing my cheek. You look amazing. That blue really pops on you. I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that once overflowed with love, now hollow and scheming. Thank you, sweetheart, I managed to say, forcing a smile. I'm so happy for your special day. In that instant I knew the bond between mother and son was dead. Before me stood not the boy I had raised, but a stranger, cold, manipulative, and greedy. Where's Chelsea? I asked, keeping my tone level. She's just a little antsy, he replied. You know how brides are. I nodded and smiled. Well, I'll go congratulate her then. Scott merely nodded, completely unaware of the tsunami gathering right before him. I walked toward the bridal suite. The door was slightly ajar. Laughter and the clinking of bubbly glasses spilled out. To me, those sounds were no longer joyful. They were the mocking echoes of fate. I moved closer, quiet as a ghost, barely breathing. Then I heard Chelsea's voice, sharp, confident, dripping with arrogance. Ladies, just a few more months and I'll officially be rich. Scott has no idea I've already spoken with a divorce lawyer. Under marital property law, I'll get half of everything we receive today. Half of $12 million. Can you imagine? My knees nearly buckled. So Chelsea had her own hustle. She wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice in the scam. What about the old lady? One of her friends asked mockingly. Easy, Chelsea sneered. She's already in the palm of my hand. Once the money's in, I'll convince Scott to put her in a nursing home. That woman's lived long enough and thinks she owns everything. It's time her act came to an end. Their laughter filled the room, sharp, cruel, like a pack of hyenas celebrating over a carcass. I stepped back from the door, feeling trapped in a waking nightmare. My son was cheating on his fiancée with his secretary. His fiancée was using both of us for money. And I, a foolish 65-year-old woman, was about to hand over my entire life's work, my blood, sweat, and tears on a silver platter. But now I knew everything. Every detail, every filthy scheme. And they had no clue that I had heard it all. I walked quickly out to the church parking lot, got into my SUV, and gripped my phone tightly. My world had just imploded. And yet, strangely, for the first time in years, my mind felt completely clear, as if that shock had finally blown away the fog that had clouded my heart for so long. I called my lawyer, Richard Miller, my trusted friend and legal partner for 20 years. He answered by the second ring. Mrs. Grace, how are you? I've prepped all the documents for this afternoon's transfer. Richard, I said, keeping my voice steady, cancel the transaction immediately. Silence filled the line for a few seconds. Are you sure? Everything's locked and loaded. Just waiting for your signature after the ceremony. I'm completely sure. And tomorrow morning I need you to swing by my house. We're revising my will. A big one, Richard. A very big one. He hesitated. Mrs. Grace, did something happen? You sound different. Let's just say I finally woke up from a long nap and I can finally see my family for who they really are. I hung up and sat quietly, watching groups of guests walk into the church through the windshield. They smiled, dressed to the nines, holding flowers, completely oblivious that they were about to witness the biggest performance of their lives. I could have stopped the wedding right then and there, exposed everything in front of everyone. I could have dragged Chelsea aside and told her I knew about every part of their plan. But then I realized that would be far too easy for them. Those who had plotted to destroy me for months didn't deserve just a burst of my anger. They deserved something deeper, something lasting. A lesson they would never forget. I walked back inside just as the ceremony began. Moving slowly down the aisle, I held my head high, smiling warmly, the picture of a proud, joyful mother, a flawless act. Scott saw me, forcing a grin, then glanced at Chelsea, radiant in her French lace gown, shimmering under the afternoon light. She nodded slightly toward me, her smile full of smug triumph. They looked perfect, a perfect couple in a perfect tragedy. When the minister spoke of love, loyalty, and trust, I found it almost laughable. I listened to their vows, and all I felt was a strange calm. The calm of someone who knows she holds all the power. "Does anyone object to this union?" the minister asked, following tradition. I parted my lips, almost rising from my seat. I pictured their stunned faces, the whispers spreading across the room, but I stayed still. I had another plan, crueler, sharper, and one that would hurt them far longer. When the minister finally said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," I clapped with everyone else, my smile brighter than the bride's. It was an impeccable act. After the ceremony, I went straight to the reception, greeting every guest, saying the sweetest words I'd ever spoken, each one a deliberate lie. When Scott asked me to dance, I placed my hand on his shoulder, leaned closer and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." He smiled, his eyes softening. "I know, Mom. I love you so much." I looked into his eyes, my smile gentle as a breeze. "I love you too, Scott. Always." He had no idea that love had already turned into his sentence. The toast. When it came time for the toast, Scott walked over and handed me the microphone, his face beaming with confidence. "Mom, would you like to say a few words? It would mean the world to me." "Of course, son." I smiled. The room fell silent. Chelsea looked at me from the main table, her dazzling smile as polished as her act. I began, my voice clear and composed. "Thank you all for being here today. As Scott's mother, I can't express how happy I am to see my son marry the woman he loves." Applause filled the room. I continued, my tone slow but firm. "Today, as a special wedding gift, I plan to transfer $12 million, my entire life savings, to Scott and Chelsea." A low murmur swept through the room. Scott froze, his hand tightening around his glass. Chelsea leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming with greed and satisfaction. I paused for a few seconds, then said calmly, "But I've realized there's something far more valuable than money. Today I want to give you both the truth." The room fell into a heavy silence. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. I looked straight at my son and his bride, both now visibly pale. "The truth," I said slowly, each word hitting like a hammer, "is the most powerful thing in the world. And today I've learned it all, about the secret phone calls, the plans made behind my back, and how your love for each other was never real. It was only for my money." The laughter, the music, all vanished. Only suffocating silence remained. The perfect couple now looked like two criminals awaiting their verdict. I took a sip of champagne, letting my gaze sweep across the stunned guests. The room was thick with tension, whispers flickering like sparks. Even the photographer had stopped shooting, his camera hanging uselessly at his chest, eyes fixed on me. I smiled calmly, shifting my gaze from Scott to Chelsea. This morning, I woke up and found my head shaved clean. Someone had done it while I slept, and left me a little note. I pulled the paper from my purse, unfolding it slowly so those nearby could read the cruel, mocking words. "Now you finally look like who you really are, a pathetic old woman. Have a lovely day at my wedding." A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Dozens of heads turned toward Chelsea, whose face had gone white as a sheet, her lips pressed into a thin line. Scott stood rigid beside me, his fists clenched tight at his sides. "Mom," he blurted out, his voice cracking. I raised my hand to stop him. "Not yet, son. I'm not finished." My tone was calm, almost gentle, the way you'd soothe a child, but every word cut sharper than a blade. That cruel act led me to discover things far more disgusting. Secrets that some people in this room tried so hard to hide. I began walking around the main table, each step slow and deliberate, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. For example, my son Scott has been having a secret fling with his assistant Vanessa for the past 6 months, all while planning this wedding with Chelsea. A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. Scott shot up from his chair, knocking over his wine glass, which shattered into 100 pieces. "Mom, stop it. That's not true, is it?" I looked straight into his eyes. Didn't you promise Vanessa that once you received my money, you two would start a new life together? Didn't you say you'd divorce Chelsea, leave everything behind, and run away with her? Chelsea also stood up, her face twisted in rage and panic. That's absurd, she shouted. She's lying. She's just jealous that Scott doesn't need her anymore. I turned to her, my smile thin as a knife's edge. Oh, my dear Chelsea, but you're not innocent either, are you? Would you like to tell everyone about your little meeting this morning with the divorce lawyer? About your plan to take half of the $12 million I was going to gift you? About how you plan to dump Scott the moment the money hit your account? The room went dead silent. Chelsea's mouth fell open, her face turning from red to a deep bruised purple. Go on. Do you have anything to say? I tilted my head, my voice soft as silk, but sharp enough to slice skin. Or shall I continue? Tell them how you plan to convince Scott to put me in a nursing home because I've lived too long? I suppose it'd be quieter there, wouldn't it? A few nervous laughs broke out. No one knew whether it was from shock or discomfort. I stepped back. The air was electric. Some guests raised their phones to record, while Chelsea's parents stumbled forward, their faces flushed with shame. Scott trembled. Mom, I don't know where you heard all that, but... From your own mouth, Scott. I interrupted coldly. I heard your phone call with Vanessa this morning. Every word, every plan, every detail of how the two of you would use my money to run away and start over. Scott collapsed back into his chair, utterly drained. Chelsea stood pale as a ghost, her lips trembling. And you, Chelsea? I pointed straight at her. I heard you brag to your girlfriends about divorcing Scott once you got the money and convincing him to ship me off to a nursing home to set himself free. You're pathetic. You're insane. Chelsea screamed, her voice shrill. I lifted my chin, my voice rising strong and unwavering. Insane? No. I've simply lost my illusions about a son's love, about gratitude I foolishly believed existed. I turned toward the audience. Hundreds of eyes locked on me. 33 years ago, when my husband died, I worked day and night to raise Scott, to build the company he now inherits. I sacrificed my youth, my health, every opportunity. Also, my son could have a comfortable life. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from release. And now I find that I've become nothing but an obstacle, an old woman to be shaved bald, humiliated, and tossed into a nursing home once she's no longer useful. Scott broke down, sobbing. Mom, please let me explain. Explain what, Scott? I cut in. Explain how you can cheat on your fiancé, while accepting your wedding money from your mother? Or how you plan to throw me out of the very house I built with my own two hands. Chelsea's father stepped closer, resting a trembling hand on his daughter's shoulder. Chelsea, is what she's saying true? He asked, his voice cracking. She lowered her head, silent, her whole body shaking. I took a deep breath, my tone steady and low. And the truth is, you both deserve exactly what you've earned. Nothing. I turned toward the door, walking away, then stopped, my hand resting on the handle. Oh, one more thing, I said, glancing back at them one last time. That $12 million? I canceled the wire this morning. Consider that my real wedding gift. A chance to start your lives together. This time without the money of the foolish old woman you tried to destroy. I walked out of the hall to the sounds of gasps and their desperate, fading pleas. Outside, the cool Boston air brushed against my face. I inhaled deeply. For the first time in years I felt free. Behind me the chaos blurred, shouting, chairs scraping, glass shattering. But all of it was already part of the past. I drove home in silence. My phone rang nonstop. Scott, Chelsea, then unknown numbers. I turned it off. Peace wrapped around me like a warm blanket on a cold night. When I arrived home, the living room was bathed in golden light. For the first time in years, the house truly felt mine. I took off my wig, ran my hand over my bare head and smiled. It was no longer a mark of humiliation, but a symbol of rebirth. Chelsea had meant to break me, but in doing so, she handed me back my strength. That night, I slept better than I ever had. A new legacy. The next morning, my lawyer, Richard Miller, arrived as promised. Mrs. Grace, he said, opening his briefcase. I've seen the videos from the reception spreading all over the internet. Are you all right? I've never been better, I replied with a genuine smile. Did you bring the papers I asked for? Yes, but are you sure about this? You're donating your entire estate to charity? I nodded firmly. Absolutely. Everything will go to 3 foundations that help widowed women start their own businesses. I want them to have the opportunity one once had to fight for a loan. He nodded, eyes full of respect. I signed the new will, a clean final line under my past. I had lost a son, but I had found myself again, and in the quiet of that morning, I knew that was my true legacy. Scott would not receive a single cent. His inheritance was his betrayal. But what if Scott contests the will? Richard Miller asked, his voice tinged with concern. I smiled calmly without a trace of bitterness. Let him try. I have recordings of all of Scott's conversations, enough to prove he only ever wanted to use me. No judge could ever blame me for this decision. Scott wrote his own sentence. In the weeks that followed, Scott tried to reach me again and again. First there were pleas. Then came the legal threats and finally desperate emotional manipulation. He said he would lose everything I'd ever given him, not realizing he already had. His greed had taken it all away. Even Chelsea showed up at my door, her face streaked with tears. Grace, please. It was all a misunderstanding. Scott and I truly want to make things right, to be close to you again, to be a real family. I looked at her through the narrow opening of the door, but didn't let her in. A real family? You mean one built on respect, not on treating me like an ATM?
Chelsea nodded, sighing.
Yes, we've learned our lesson. Please give us another chance. I replied softly, my tone calm yet firm. That's good. I'm glad you've learned something, but teaching you isn't my job anymore. You're both adults, and adults face the consequences of their own choices. I closed the door and never opened it again. 2 months later, through mutual acquaintances, I heard that Scott and Chelsea had divorced. Once they realized there would be no inheritance, their perfect marriage collapsed like a house of cards. Scott tried to rekindle things with Vanessa, his young assistant, but she left him too when she learned there was no more money to cling to. Chelsea moved back in with her parents, looking for a job for the first time in years. And Scott? He sold his luxury car and moved into a rundown little apartment. I didn't feel happy or vindicated. Strangely, I didn't feel anything at all. They were no longer part of my life. Their tragedies were no longer mine. I began rebuilding my own life. A new one, free and peaceful. At 65, I decided to do everything I'd postponed for decades. Paint and finally learn to live for myself. I signed up for an art class. A dream from my youth I'd never dared to pursue. Each brush stroke, each color made my heart come alive again. My teacher, Carmen, was also an independent woman who had raised her child alone. We quickly became kindred spirits. One afternoon, as we painted in the park bathed in golden sunlight, Carmen smiled and said, "Isn't it funny? The minute we start putting ourselves first, life starts to bloom again." I nodded because I felt it too every single day. I also began to travel. Italy, France, Japan, all the places I once thought were out of reach. The world was wider, brighter, and more beautiful than I had ever imagined. During a trip to Tuscany, I met Robert, a 70-year-old Italian-American widower, who had lost his wife 2 years earlier. It wasn't love at first sight, but rather a gentle understanding between two people who had known loss and learned to appreciate peace. My wife used to say that when the kids grow up, we have to relearn how to live for ourselves, Robert said as we walked through a vineyard under the soft evening sun. But I don't think it's about going back to who we were. It's about discovering who we can become, the best version of ourselves. He was right. I didn't return to the old Grace. I created a new one, stronger, freer, and happier. A year after that wedding disaster, I decided to sell the family house. It was too big, too heavy with memories that no longer served me. I bought a small home by the sea in coastal Carolina with a sunlit art studio and a garden full of roses. It was my own little paradise. On the day I signed the sale papers, Scott appeared for the last time. "Mom, are you seriously selling the house I grew up in?" he asked, his voice sunken. He had lost weight, looked exhausted, and the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by emptiness. I looked at him for a long time before answering, "Yes, Scott. It's time for both of us to move on. I know I was wrong. I regret everything, Mom." I felt a flicker of sadness, but no longer the weakness that once ruled me. Scott, I said softly yet firmly, you made your choices and choices have consequences. Now you have to learn to live with them. You must take responsibility for your own life. He whispered, tears falling. But you're still my mother. Yes, I said. I was your mother for 33 years. I gave you everything I had to give. Now it's time you learn to live without clinging to me. I closed the door and that was the last time I ever saw him. 2 years have passed. Now I live a life I never dared to dream of before. Morning coffee on my balcony overlooking the ocean. Afternoons spent painting. Evenings reading or walking with Robert. My paintings are displayed in local galleries, bought by people who truly love them. I am no longer the exhausted mother. I am Grace, the artist, the woman who finally found herself. My hair has grown back whiter than before, but I keep it that way. It's a symbol of strength and rebirth. Sometimes I wonder if Scott ever realizes what he lost. Then I smile because it no longer matters. I've learned that motherhood doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. It means loving enough to set boundaries, even when it breaks your heart. Because true love teaches independence, not dependence. I am Grace and this is my story. And you, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. And if you want to keep hearing real stories of courage, betrayal, and rediscovery, stick with us so we can keep learning together how to love more wisely and live more freely. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from those we love the most. Yet, it's from those very wounds that we find the strength to rise stronger, wiser, and truer to ourselves. Grace's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about a woman who dared to say enough is enough, who set boundaries and who reclaimed herself after years of pain. Because real love, whether it's family, friendship, or life itself, cannot exist without respect. So what about you? If you were in Grace's place, would you have the guts to let go, to love yourself first? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the strength someone out there needs. And if you want to keep listening to stories like this where every experience becomes a lesson in resilience and compassion, stay with this channel. Together we'll continue the journey, learning to love, but this time to love with freedom and maturity. Sending you a warm hug. See ya in the next one.